While America is struggling to keep up with electricity demand from AI, electric vehicles, and factories, Canada has built something that gives it a powerful advantage, creating clean electricity on a scale that's hard to ignore. And now, that energy is flowing south, turning Canada into a partner the US can't afford to lose. BC Hydro switched on the sixth and final generating unit at the Site C Hydroelectric Dam on British Columbia's Peace River. With all 6 units running, Site C produces more than 1,100 megawatts of clean electricity, enough to power approximately 500,000 homes every single year. That single commissioning event boosted BC Hydro's total electricity supply by approximately 8%. The dam stands 60 meters high and stretches more than 1 kilometer across the Peace River. It required placement of approximately 16 million cubic meters of earth-fill material across a construction program that ran from July 2015 through 2025. It is the most expensive infrastructure project in British Columbia's history, and it will run for more than 100 years. Canada already had one of the strongest electricity systems on Earth before Site C came online. The country is the world's 4th largest electricity producer. Hydropower accounts for approximately 60% of national electricity generation. British Columbia generates approximately 85 to 90% of its electricity from water. Quebec's Hydro-Quebec system has installed capacity exceeding 36,000 megawatts, one of the largest electricity producers in all of North America. Manitoba Hydro operates major facilities on the Nelson River. Ontario's grid runs at approximately 94% non-emitting capacity, combining nuclear, hydro, and wind. Canada built this system over decades. Site C is the newest addition to a foundation that already existed at enormous scale. America needs what Canada built. That is the part Washington finds uncomfortable. The United States is entering a period of electricity demand growth unlike anything since the mid-20th century. Artificial intelligence data centers are among the most energy-intensive facilities ever constructed. A single large hyperscale facility can consume as much electricity as a small city. Electric vehicles are adding millions of new load points to a grid already stretched thin by the retirement of coal and nuclear plants. Semiconductor factories, battery plants, steel electrification, and industrial decarbonization are all hitting the grid simultaneously. American grid operators are warning that supply cannot keep up with demand on the current trajectory. The permitting and transmission processes required to build new American generation operate on timelines measured in years and decades. Canada's hydroelectricity does not face those constraints. The dams are already built. The water flows continuously. Hydroelectric generation is firm and dispatchable, unlike solar and wind, which only produce when conditions are right. A hydro facility can ramp up and down in direct response to demand. That makes Canadian hydropower uniquely valuable as a reliability anchor in a grid increasingly dependent on intermittent renewable sources. Canadian electricity exports to the United States already run at approximately 60 terawatt hours per year, roughly equivalent to the entire annual consumption of a mid-sized American state. The Champlain-Hudson Power Express, a 339-mile high-voltage direct current transmission line running under Lake Champlain and the Hudson River, began delivering Hydro-Quebec power directly into New York City in March 2025. The line carries up to 1,250 megawatts of Quebec hydropower into the New York grid and will cover approximately 20% of New York City's annual electricity needs from Canadian water. That is one transmission line from one Canadian province, supplying 1/5 of New York City's power. The trade conflict of 2025 briefly showed Americans exactly how exposed some regions have become. Ontario Premier Doug Ford announced a 25% electricity surcharge on exports to Michigan, Minnesota, and New York in March 2025 as a retaliatory measure in response to American tariffs on Canadian goods. The states receiving that warning were states whose grid operators depend on Canadian imports for reliability. Ford ultimately held back from implementing the surcharge, but the reaction from American grid operators was immediate. The episode established something that had never been publicly tested before, that Canadian provinces hold a direct lever over electricity reliability in parts of the American Midwest and Northeast, and that Washington understands this clearly when the lever is touched. Site C's completion arrived in the middle of Canada's most ambitious electricity planning moment in the country's history. Prime Minister Carney unveiled Canada's National Electricity Strategy on May 14th, 2026, targeting a doubling of Canada's electricity grid capacity by 2050 at a total projected construction cost exceeding $1 trillion. The strategy commits to lowering energy costs for 70% of Canadian households, creating 130,000 new electricity sector jobs by 2050, and positioning Canada as a clean energy exporter to allied nations that cannot generate enough power for their own growing industrial demand. Site C, producing 5,100 gigawatt hours annually from a dam that will run for more than a century, is the most recent addition to the generation base that strategy is building on. The criticism of Site C is documented and legitimate. The project flooded approximately 9,330 hectares of Peace River Valley, land some of the most productive agricultural land in northeastern British Columbia, farmed since the 1940s. Treaty 8 First Nations, including West Moberly First Nations, Prophet River First Nation, and Blueberry River First Nations argued the dam violated their constitutionally protected treaty rights, and that consultation was inadequate. Legal challenges ran through the courts across multiple years of active construction. Environmental groups documented impacts on fish, habitat, river ecosystems, and wildlife corridors in the watershed. The BC Utilities Commission had rejected BC Hydro's original application to build Site C in 1983, citing lack of demonstrated need at the time. The demand conditions that made Site C unnecessary in 1983 have transformed beyond recognition. British Columbia's LNG facility, power requirements, data center growth in Metro Vancouver, and the industrial expansion of northeastern BC collectively created the load the 1983 Commission said did not exist. The dam that was rejected 40 years ago came online in 2024 and reached full capacity in August 2025. Site C generates 5,100 gigawatt hours annually. It costs $16 billion. It powers 500,000 homes. It boosts BC Hydro supply by 8%. It has been running for more than 100 years. It is one component of a Canadian electricity system already exporting 60 terawatt hours per year to the United States, a number that is growing every year as Canada builds more and America needs more. The lights in parts of America depend on decisions made in Canada. Site C just made that dependency larger. The broader picture that Site C fits into is one that Washington has been slow to fully reckon with. Canada is not simply building incremental additions to an existing electricity system. It is executing a deliberate, multi-decade strategy to become one of the world's dominant clean energy exporters at precisely the moment that clean, dispatchable power has become the scarcest and most strategically valuable commodity in the global industrial economy. The $1 trillion National Electricity Strategy targets grid doubling by 2050. The Darlington Small Modular Reactor, the G7's first commercial SMR, targets first power by 2030. The Bruce Power refurbishment and the Darlington refurbishment, both completed ahead of schedule and under budget in early 2026, demonstrated a nuclear construction execution record that no other Western country can currently match. LNG Canada exported 1 million metric tons of natural gas to Asia in April 2026, a monthly record, while simultaneously delivering the first Canadian LNG cargo to China, a market the United States sanctioned itself out of. The Enbridge Sunrise Pipeline expansion adds 300 million cubic feet of natural gas per day to Pacific export capacity. The Alberta-Ottawa Implementation Agreement targets 1 million barrels of oil per day flowing west by the early 2030s. Every one of these developments is a separate piece of the same architecture. A Canada that produces energy at scale, exports it to an expanding range of buyers, and does so through infrastructure that no tariff can reach and no political statement can shut off. Site C powered up on August 9th, 2025. The strategy it belongs to is running decades longer than that.